Welcome, everyone. My name is Sue Harmon, and I'm a librarian at the Manchester City Library in Manchester, New Hampshire. Thank you for joining us today for this presentation of Tales of the 10th. And your presenter today is Jeff Like. He's the executive director of the New England Ski Museum in Franconia and North Conway, New Hampshire. He produces the annual exhibit that the museum creates and the quarterly journal of the New England Ski Museum, which publishes the content of those exhibits for the museum members and visitors. Like and his wife live in North Conway. They have 2 adult children, both of whom are far better skiers than their parents. All right, and without further ado, I will let Jeff take it away.
Well, thanks, Sue. Thanks very much. Appreciate being here. Let me get my screen shared. That should do it. Yeah, so the New England Ski Museum is located, our first spot was in Franconia, New Hampshire. And I'm gonna move this away. There we go. Franconia, New Hampshire, where the first aerial tramway in the United States was. And right here, you can see that. I'm not doing so well right now. This is our first building. Was started out as a vehicle maintenance garage at Cannon Mountain, and you can actually see down here one of the first tram cars in the country, the 1938 aerial tramway. We've been here since 1982, and the organization got going about 1977. And some of the earliest directors and supporters were 10th Mountain Division veterans. A couple of them here. Sue Williams on the left from Vermont, and Dick Wilson from New Hampshire on the right were early board members. And the idea of a ski museum really appealed to these guys, so much so that our mission statement includes telling the story of the World War II era 10th Mountain Division and their impact on skiing, which was considerable. So that's really our interest in the 10th, not so much the military history aspect of it, but the skiing history of it. I'm not sure if, Sue, are you seeing a bunch of boxes popping up on my screen?
So I see an orange box that says, please move this window away from the shared application.
I'm hoping that goes away because I don't really see a way to do it. So aside from that, from 1982 really until about 2000, we accumulated a tremendous amount of collections, skis, boots, bindings, films, clothing, you name it, and was really overflowing our buildings and the storage barns where they were kept. So we, in the year 2003, were able to build a separate collections building at Cannon Mountain here, and we've gone ahead and filled that up. And then in 2018, we were lucky enough to find a place in North Conway, right on the edge of Shula Park in downtown North Conway, and have an actual second location with different, a completely different exhibit here than we have in Franconia. Both are open 7 days a week this time of year from 10 to 5, and we'd love to have you visit. That collections building that I showed you is the basis of our exhibits and some of the other things we've produced over the years, including this 10th Mountain exhibit is one of the most popular we've ever done. So we made an exhibit catalog out of that called Tales of the 10th. Over the Head Wall about Tuckerman Ravine is another popular one. And we've done a series of videos, DVDs over the years. But really it's the annual exhibits that we try to change every year, although we haven't done one for a year now because of COVID, but to keep things fresh in the areas. So I'm gonna wish that box would go away. It's kind of driving me crazy, but I don't know what to do about it. The story of the 10th Mountain Division from our point of view starts with a ski race over in Vermont in the winter of 1940 at Bromley. And four well-known skiers were sitting around after the race. I've heard at the Orvis Inn or at a place called Johnny Seesaw's, talking about the war, how the war was going in Finland. Russia had invaded Finland, and Finland was holding them off for the time being, mostly with ski troopers. So Bob Livermore here on the left from somewhere around Lincoln, Massachusetts, Alec Bright from the Boston area, were both Olympic skiers, had gone to the Olympics in 1936 in Garmisch. And Minnie Dole of Connecticut was C. Minot Dole, and all his friends called him Minnie, had just founded 2 years previous the National Ski Patrol and turned it into as it is indicated, a national organization. So he had a pre-existing network. And the fourth man was Roger Langley, who was the president of the National Ski Association, what's today called the USSA. And the four of them were very aware of the Finnish guerrilla war that was sort of holding off the Russian juggernaut mechanized columns with troopers on skis who could move around the countryside quickly and set up ambushes. It was really quite a remarkable effort that ultimately was overrun. But the skiers around the world took notice, especially in the U.S. And these four guys sort of, were saying to each other, well, what if in this age of countries being invaded, what if the U.S. was invaded down the historic invasion route from the St. Lawrence down the Hudson River Valley in the middle of the winter with ski troops? Would the U.S. Army have any way of parrying that? And the answer they came up with, of course, was no. So they resolved to take it to the War Department and advise them that maybe they needed a winter warfare capability. And the National Ski Patrol got behind the effort. The National Ski Association got behind the effort. The American Alpine Club also did. And through a long series of meetings and turndowns and frustrations, ultimately the War Department agreed. And that you can certainly look into that history if you're interested, but it's kind of beyond us tonight. One early piece of information these guys got was that from Dave Bradley here, who went over to Finland right after the war had stopped and interviewed the Finnish soldiers and talked about their equipment and sent notes and drawings like this one back to Minnie Dole about how they had operated and how an American force might operate. But there was a lot of resistance. Dole was kind of the point person going into the War Department in Washington and New York, and endured a lot of frustration, as I said. The man in the center, General Irving Phillipson, was sort of his first ally in the military. He had been up at Camp Pine in upstate New York, where Fort Drum is now, and knew how unprepared the American military was to operate in the winter, and went to bat to some extent for Dole, but he realized he had a reputation as a gadfly and tried to steer Dole to some other advocates. Another one was Henry Twaddle here. He was seen in this photo at the end of the war, interviewing a German POW. Also saw the necessity and pitched in. And even though nothing happened very quickly, by the winter of 1941, at least the U.S. Army decided they would keep elements of 6 divisions in the northern part of the country for the winter, which is something they never did before. And these 6 divisions formed little ski patrols. One of them is pictured here. I think it's the 15th Division out around Mount Rainier, and They actually did a circumnavigation of Mount Rainier on skis. And another of the divisions was the 41st out in the Olympic Peninsula of Washington, where they did a traverse of the Olympic Mountains. And one of the first lessons to come out of that was that, oh geez, sorry about that. One of the first lessons to come out was that the American military really was totally unprepared equipment-wise for any kind of winter warfare. And very quickly, the Quartermaster Corps in Washington stood up a unit to start developing some of this equipment and to understand how to operate in the winter. And they hired this fellow, Adams Carter, from Milton, Massachusetts, recent Harvard graduate, who they hired to translate all of the European military winter manuals that could be found. Of course, all the Europeans armies had winter manuals, had winter operations. So Ad Carter was working on getting the literature. The Quartermaster Corps went out and started developing, buying skis from like the Northland Company, ski maker here, and the Alpine Club, and the Army collaborated on an expedition in 1942 to Alaska to test all this stuff that they had developed, and all of a sudden was coming online in the summer of 42, and they needed cold weather to go out and test it. So a couple of people here, Bob Bates from Exeter, New Hampshire, Brad Washburn from Boston were on that trip. Brad Washburn was later the head of the Boston Museum of Science. And these people actually, Colonel Jackman, Albert Jackman, was the head of the Winter Warfare Board, who was in charge of testing all this equipment. You can see here that they've bundled up a bunch of skis, and they're going to try to drop it from an airplane onto a glacier to see about supplying troops on a glacier. This group actually summited Mount McKinley, Denali it's called today. And here's a photo, one of them snapped on the way down. And equipment, came through this pipeline relatively quickly. And one of the biggest developments was this boot that was advertised. It was a combination climbing and ski boot that could be used in the bear trap bindings of the day, but also was good on rock and ice, and kind of as a substitute for shearling material. This what was later called the Wildcat Park after the war in surplus, but a very, very warm kind of artificial pile liner to their outerwear. And also they were working on over snow equipment and went up to the Columbia ice fields in the Canadian Rockies and built roads up onto the ice field where they could test the Studebaker vehicles that ultimately became the early weasels like this. This is being tested in Colorado, but this is what they were working on on the Columbia ice fields. One of those people that was on that detachment to the ice fields was Bob Morrill, who came back from the war and founded Storyland in Glen, New Hampshire. And a lot of people are aware of that place. And then in November 15th, 1941, 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor, and certainly appropriate to talk about on Pearl Harbor Day, the first element of any of the American military winter warfare was formed at Fort Lewis, Washington, right outside of Seattle. And you can see here that the Mount Rainier is looming in the distance. And the initial people into that unit were a few of the veterans from those ski patrols that had done the 41st and the 3rd Division that had done the trips out in the West the year before. But very, very soon, recruits started arriving that actually the National Ski Patrol had recruited. It's, I think, the oddest recruiting agency ever for the U.S. military was the National Ski Patrol, and they actually the civilian agency somehow managed to get the ability to get the people that they recommended out of basic training all over the country and sent to this unit in Fort Lewis, Washington. It was commanded by this man, Lieutenant Colonel Onslow Rolfe, who was born in New Hampshire and Concord, but moved out. His parents moved out when he was 5. Cavalryman, as you can see, really Colonel Rolfe had no idea about skiing. He was a bit of a mountain climber and hiker, but he led the effort for the first year and a half. In the first of the, there were, as I say, the National Ski Patrol started sending people out to Fort Lewis. And this fellow, Charles McLean, Dartmouth graduate, wrote an article for one of the ski magazines about being, the first recruit from the National Ski Patrol to end up at Fort Lewis, and how baffled the soldiers were there when he asked for the barracks of the 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment, which no one seemed to knew existed. But he's a New Hampshire native. His father was a prominent attorney in Concord, and his grandfather, McLean, had been governor at one point. And he was sort of, the personification of the kind of people that the Ski Patrol was trying to recruit into the mountain units. College educated, a great skier, captain of the Dartmouth team, and a lot of the other recruits from the patrol were like that. And that first winter of 1942, they trained at Mount Rainier. You can see them at one of the lodges here. They summited Mount Rainier I think in May under winter conditions, and then in the summer went back to Fort Lewis, while the War Department, not for the first time, tried to figure out exactly what to do with them. Because they were a light infantry regiment, they didn't have a lot of mechanical vehicles because the intention was they'd be off-road. So they depended a lot on transport of gear by mules, as you can see here. Became a sort of an ongoing theme in the training of the 10th. They used gravel pits to set up climbing walls to experiment with, teach people how to climb. But there were some very skilled people in the 87th, the early 87th, and they formed detachments to go out around the country and train other infantry units in mountain operations. Here's a shot of a detachment of the 87th that had gone to the Aspen, Colorado area and were experimenting with the engineers, setting up portable bridges and portable tramways, things that Adams, Carter, all those European military manuals had stressed were important. So the people often ask, what did they do in New Hampshire? And the answer is really only this one detachment that I've become aware of. And this is the cliffs at Cannon Mountain in Franconia Notch. In the November of 1942, a detachment was sent here, staying in Lincoln, and they were training another division. I think it might have been the 33rd Division in sort of mountain operations, how to walk on in mountainous terrain like the Talus Slope at the foot of Cannon Mountain, and they were going across the street, climbing up Mount Lafayette, with setting up mock ambushes and that kind of thing during the day. Then at night they stayed here at the Lincoln Hotel in Lincoln, long gone now, but always kind of baffled some of those veterans who were there because they had lessons in Norwegian language lessons at night. And, the thinking was, gee, we must be there must be an invasion of Norway imminent. There never was, but never quite really explained what that was about. Meanwhile, the War Department was looking at expanding the 87th into a full division with 2 more regiments, ultimately the 86th and the 85th. and were searching in the West for a place to put a camp for 15,000 troopers in the mountains somewhere. And they settled on this place near Henry's Lake, Idaho, about a half an hour's drive from West Yellowstone, and started building foundations and housing, and quickly abandoned the idea, though, in the fall of 1942. But still, these little remnants of that first effort are right by the side of the road at Henry's Lake. But the effort switched down to a little whistle stop on the main line of a railroad going through Tennessee Pass, Colorado. A little place called Pando, really uninhabited, but had a broad flat valley at about 8,000 or 9,000 feet. And this place was selected along with the Forest Service's input, because it was Forest Service land. And in the summer of 1942 and into the fall, 500 buildings were built in this valley, enough to house 15,000 men. And here's a little shot of what that looks like from once it was completed. Had little ski tows at each end of the valley, had a rifle range up at the end, here's a shot of, actually comes from a Warner Brothers picture that they shot out there. Here are their barracks and troopers walking with their their ski shoulder arms. And because of this National Ski Patrol recruiting drive, where they had really publicized, in ski magazines, the ability for people to apply for this unit, all of a sudden, people at Camp Hale started noticing that very famous skiers were seen walking down the streets, like Torger Tokel here on the left in the whites. Torger Tokel was the world champion for 3 years, I think, in ski jumping. And it was people were talking about how shocking it was to see these famous people that they'd seen in the ski media. Right up above Tennessee Pass was this little ski area that they used called Cooper Hill. They had a T-bar lift and gave lessons up there. You can still ski it today. It's called Cooper Hill outside of Leadville, Colorado. It's a nice little area with a nice display about the 10th mountain. And they trained on mules, how to pack mules. They hired a lot of people from the South for their facility as mule skinners, and those Southerners all had to learn how to ski, and the skiers presumably learned how to pack mules. And they brought in experts like Villemar Stephenson, the Arctic explorer, to build igloos, and they skied up Homestake Peak. As you can see, the zigzag track that Francis Limmer drew, that they ascended Homestake on. Francis Limmer was the bootmaker in Vail, New Hampshire. And they assembled a lot of people from all over the country that were skiers and exposed them to this kind of snowpack. And a lot of them after the war sort of never went back to where they came from, at least in their ski lives. Winston Pope from Lancaster, New Hampshire, was out at Camp Hale as the official photographer for the Army Signal Corps. And these three fellows were speaking of famous people that everybody knew, these were, on the left was Peter Gabriel, the famous Swiss mountain guide, who was kind of the mountaineering guru at Camp Hale. In the middle, Friedel Pfeiffer from St. Anton, Austria, who was one of the Hunter Ski School top instructors, and then Walter Prager on the right, who had been originally from Davos, Switzerland, a great racer in Europe in the early 30s, who was the coach of the Dartmouth ski team. And they were all sergeants, they're still enlisted men, but they were the sort of the heart and soul of the expertise of the skiing and mountaineering ability of the 10th at Camp Hale. And there were a lot of people weren't great skiers or great climbers that were in that. A lot of them came in through regular Army channels, but the really the elite of the instructors for the mountaineering and the skiing were in two groups, two very small groups called the Mountain Training Group and the 10th Mountain Reconnaissance Troop, MTG or 10th Recon. And those are some of the names that really stand out now as people that we've heard of in other realms. This is Nate Morrell, who was in the MTG on I think on a Camp Hale to Vail, Colorado trip in the winter. They did things like expeditions up the Mount Massif and Mount Elbert in the middle of winter, the two highest peaks in Colorado, and really made some marks in mountaineering in the area. And they were also the MTG and the 10th Recon became the groups that were sent out to other units to train them. They set up down here at Seneca Rocks, West Virginia, set up a rock climbing school that Peter Gabriel was in charge of, where scouts and snipers and were trained from other units, people that had to climb. Here's Peter Gabriel on Seneca Rock. And so it was a long training period for the 87th. By the time there were two more regiments, the 87th was sent to Kiska in the Aleutian Islands, where the Japanese were believed to be entrenched. Attu and the Aleutians had been occupied along with Kiska. There'd been a big battle at Attu where the Japanese were ultimately kicked out. But as far as the Army knew, the Japanese were still up in the hills in Kiska, and the 87th was sent there in the summer of '43. And it really, by the time the Army got there, the 87th, the Japanese had fled, and the thick Aleutian fog had totally evacuated the island. But nevertheless, there were the first night or two that they were there, a couple of units of the couple of companies of the 87th got into a firefight, and there were 11 friendly fire casualties, including Hugh Emerson from Intervale, New Hampshire, seen here with Cranmore and back of him, one of the best skiers of his day. So quite tragic. And despite that, the 87th stayed at Kiska all through up until about November of 1943. Brutal weather up there. You can see the tent dug into the hill to try to get a little bit of wind protection. And I'd like to point out that this officer here addressing his men is Brad Boynton from Jackson, New Hampshire, and was one of the founders of the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation. Still trying to get rid of that window. Sorry about that. Nice line of tents set up, just the way the sergeants liked it here. And this is actually in Vail Pass, Colorado. But the story that you hear so often from veterans was that these mountain tents were awful to live in because they were totally waterproof. There was no breathability at all, and people would wake up in the morning with condensation, or in the winter with frost feathers and rime all over the inside of the tent. And they were so small, it was almost impossible to get dressed without getting wet. So they'd often, go out and set up their tent. So the sergeant liked them, and go out and build little huts like this, which were much more comfortable, or simply just sleep in their sleeping bag on some boughs. But after all this training, after 2 years of training in the spring, March and April of 1944, the division was sent out on what were called the D series for division series maneuvers for 3 weeks in the Colorado winter without benefit of barracks or any kind of warmth, and really one of the toughest winters on record at that point in Colorado in terms of cold weather. it was certainly a hardening off exercise. They had mock battles. It made an impression on all the veterans. Later on, they would talk about D series as being a brutal experience. This is kind of a nice picture, I guess, of a heavy weapons platoon on snowshoes. Not really sure when it was, probably wasn't D series, but there was always, with a bit of a debate about what's faster, skis or snowshoes. And the skiers, the heavy weapons platoon, like I said, had heavy backpacks and used snowshoes. The other platoons had skis and also, 90-pound rucksacks you read about. But whenever they went head to head, up and down dale, up and down valleys to get to a given point, it seemed like the snowshoers always beat the skiers in the end, simply because they were steadier paced. But after these 2 years, really the Army didn't know what to do with the 10th Mountain Division. It was a full strength unit. It was one of the last to be deployed overseas. In the spring of 1944, it was sent from Camp Hale to Camp Swift, Texas, which I believe is near Austin. And they spent the summer and fall down there, really kind of cratered morale in a sense, in that they didn't know if their training was going to ever be utilized for the sort of thing it was designed for. On the other hand, they in the Texas heat, they had to do forced marches of 25 miles in 8 hours. And that further hardened their physical fitness. So it was a very, very fit group. In October and November, when they finally were given orders to go overseas, and got a new commanding officer, who was the man on the right, General George P. Hayes. Hayes was just back from France, where he'd been an artillery officer. He'd been in the First World War and was a Congressional Medal of Honor winner there. And by the time they went overseas in November, December, the consensus seems to have been that Hayes was highly respected, and that Hayes, on the other hand, was getting a real appreciation of the fitness and the training of his new troops. So again, without being a military historian, the basic first quarter of 1945 that the 10th spent went something like this. They came up from Naples and went on to the Winter Line, which ran along a ridge of mountains from Riva Ridge, Mount Belvedere, to Mount Della Torretia up here. The Germans were dug in on the high ground. The Allies had attempted to push them off previously, but had not been able to do that. Their first order of business was this Riva Ridge here, which maybe you've heard about, where a German artillery observers were stationed, who could call in artillery fire all along this ridge here, if and when the 10th decided to attack it. That being accomplished, one of the most dramatic first fights of any unit I can imagine. By the early March, they were at this little village of Castigliano in the Apennines, and there was a little lull in the action until April 14th, when the whole spring offensive of the whole army started. And looking for my mouse here. And then they got out into the Po River Valley in around the 20th of March, crossed the Po on the 23rd, and ended up the war in early May at the north end of Lake Garda. Let me show you a few photos about that. But when they got there in January, by the way, without their ski equipment, without all their winter equipment, When they got there, the Apennines were snow covered, but gradually that went away as they stayed there. This is the escarpment of Riva Ridge from below, and quite an impressive looking thing. They were tasked with for weeks as scouts went out at night and scouted up 4 different routes up this ridge, and the Germans were on top. Really didn't have much of a clue that anybody would be bold enough to try to climb it and fight them, but the four routes were marked out. Some fixed ropes were put in, and on the night of February 18th to 19th, 900 men of the 86th Regiment climbed in silence up these peaks and took the ridge. Here's a somewhat different photo of it. You know, you can see they aren't total cliffs, but it's very steep terrain. The German artillery observers are up here, and took it. Here they are on the morning of the 19th. There were counterattacks that they held off. Very light casualties because it wasn't a huge battle, but still sort of a defining a moment for the 10th, their first baptism of fire. And you know, certainly if you go to Vail today and ski, you'll find a trail called Riva Ridge, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's others around. And actually, those little tramways that they practiced building came in useful on Riva Ridge, where they evacuated the wounded and sent up supplies on these little things. And having taken this Riva Ridge here in the background, then the attack on Mount Belvedere began. Still a lot of, and the casualties really started to mount at this point. The German artillery, a lot of it was sighted in. There were certainly a lot of landmines and booby traps and German infantry. More or less the same view of an aid station on Mount Belvedere in late February of 1945. They pushed along, as I say, along this ridge of going toward the little village of Casteldiano, which you can see here, pretty much destroyed by artillery. And by March 5th, you know, that first phase of their combat was done, and they had a little bit of a rest. April 14th, 1945, the spring offensive kicked off all along the Fifth Army front, and this was the day that the most casualties of the 10th occurred of any of their days of combat, including the day that a replacement second lieutenant from a replacement depot who had just joined the 10th was wounded, Bob Dole, who passed away this week. This is actually a photo of that combat on April 14th. You can't see much, but quite a few casualties were taken at this point. And yet the effort wasn't stopped. As I mentioned, by March 20th, they're in the Po Valley, the flat Po Valley terrain, and at this point now they've been given mechanized transport and were able to actually push ahead of the rest of the Fifth Army. So their flanks were exposed, you know, for miles and miles and miles. To some extent, German resistance was collapsing, but there was this whole time they were taking casualties, particularly crossing the Po River at first in rubber boats. And after a couple of days, this pontoon bridge was erected. There were German surrenders along the way, but there was stiff resistance as well. They fought north across the Po River plain, up along Lake Garda, which is back in the mountains on the way to the Brenner Pass, going into Austria. I think the thinking was that a lot of the Germans in Italy might try to get back into Austria and Germany through the Brenner Pass. So that was the 10th's objective. But by May 2nd, the German army in Italy surrendered, and the General von Senger on the left, who was in command of German forces in Italy, insisted on surrendering to General Hayes. You see in the center there, saying that he thought that General Hayes had been his most dangerous opponent in the 10th, his most dangerous opponent in the war. Coming from someone who'd been on the Russian front for years, it's kind of impressive. But this is at that surrender. And there were scenes of joy at the north end of Lake Garda, with the townspeople coming out welcoming the 10th. German warehouses with champagne were discovered, much to the joy of the troops, I imagine. And at this point, from May of 45 until August, they were here in northern Italy and up to the northeast a little bit toward Trieste, where there was some guerrilla activity. They were sort of on a peacekeeping mission, and there was time for them to do a little sightseeing, do a little climbing. They organized a few ski races, like Mount Mangart that you see here, another race on the Gross Glockner. So they had a pretty they had a very short, very intense period of combat where their casualty rate was something like 25%, and now they could relax a little bit. But always, in the back of their thinking was, as the first division, the last division to leave the U.S. to be deployed, they would be one of the first to be called on to go on to the home islands of Japan when the time came. So as they're going back from Naples to New York City on troop ships like this, these are 10th soldiers. While they were at sea, the war ended. The bombs were dropped. The Japanese surrendered, and they got home to New York. And instead of having a 30-day furlough and then being sent to the West Coast, they had a 30-day furlough, and when they came back, they were pretty much mustered out of the service, depending on their points status. And by Christmas of 1945, many of these people were civilians again. And I guess that's where our story really begins for the ski museum. But at the same time, Camp Hale was dismantled right away. German POWs from Camp Carson in Colorado took it apart in 1945 and left just a few buildings in the center that you can see that apparently the CIA used in later years to train some Tibetan guerrillas, but before long it was handed back over to the National Forest, and now it's it's kind of a historic site. There are some placards around. It's an interesting place to visit, but it's just a wide open plain again. The top of Tennessee Pass, there is a memorial to the 992 10th Mountain soldiers who lost their lives in the war. Another 4,000 were wounded, so nearly 5,000 out of the 20,000 plus men in the unit were casualties. After the war, people were very 10th Mountain veterans were instrumental in starting and growing the ski industry in the U.S. And just to pick out a few samples, and it's only a few because there were thousands and thousands who came back and worked at small ski areas and ran ski schools, ran ski patrols, owned ski shops, volunteered with ski programs. And these are just some of the ones that sort of got a lot of attention. Monty Atwater with a recoilless rifle here. He's at Squaw Valley, getting ready for the 1960 Olympics, sighting in avalanche control positions. When he first got back, the war kind of interrupted the growth of the ski industry, but it had gotten to the point where a few ski areas on national forests in the West, and specifically Alta in Utah, the Forest Service became aware that there was a big avalanche problem, that it was quite dangerous at certain times in certain weather conditions. And they hired people called snow rangers, and without really having much of a discipline of snow science at that point. But Atwater, coming out of the 10th, was hired as a snow ranger at Alta and stayed there for at least a decade. And while he was there, kind of developed the beginnings of the protocol that are still in place for controlling avalanches in Western ski areas, including things like closing trails, closing roads, never popular with the public, but also by experimenting with artillery, hand charges, and some howitzers, and then later, as you see here, with the recoilless rifle. So we owe a lot to people like Atwater and the people that followed him, who can keep us safe at ski areas where there's an avalanche problem. Larry Jump was in the 10th. Here's with his wife Marnie. Larry was kind of the first one of the 10th veterans to jump on the idea of building a ski area in Colorado, and he picked the really obvious place, Arapahoe Basin on Route 40 near Loveland Pass. Here you can see what's now Loveland Basin. I'm sorry, Arapahoe Basin, and still going strong. One of the first areas to open this year, expanded now over the backside. So Larry Jump really got off the mark, and not only founded Arapahoe Basin, but became a distributor for pommel lifts, which were a relatively inexpensive way for ski areas to start hauling people uphill and get them up a lot of vertical without a lot of upfront expense the way a chairlift would have. Friedel Pfeiffer, the top instructor at Hannes Schneider's school, was in the 10th Recon, and actually marched through Aspen on one of his expeditions with the 10th, and looked around and thought that the town had a lot of potential as a ski town, and came back after the war. There had been before the war the Roche Run cut down here into town, and Friedel Pfeiffer got in touch with the ski club and promised he'd come back, and was able very, very soon after the war, with the help of financings from Walter Papke of the Container Corporation of America, put in a series of single chairs that pretty much got up to the summit of Ajax here. And Aspen immediately became kind of a haven for other 10th Mountain veterans who were, maybe at loose ends after the war and wondering what to do. People like John Litchfield on the right here, who was owned the Red Onion bar in town for a while. Litchfield had been a Dartmouth ski team racer, and was probably among the skiers, was one of the highest ranking skiers in the 10th. Most of he'd gone to officer candidate school, came back, and I think he got to be a captain. Roe Duke Watson was another 10th Recon veteran who had run the school at the Seneca Rock School, and here he is on Homestake Peak. But he went back after the war, and with a group of people started Crystal Mountain in Washington, group of investors. Bill Healy on the left was the founder of Mount Bachelor in Oregon. Herbert Schneider, younger on the left, and at Cranmore when he was operating it on the right. Son of Hannes Schneider, came back to North Conway where his father lived, and ran Cranmore until he sold it in 1982. Wildcat Mountain, New Hampshire, started by a group of New Hampshire and Dartmouth founders, but one of the key people there was Dick May on the right here, who was the publicity director for many years. A real dry sense of humor, really nice guy who was had actually, I think, looked at Wildcat before the Wildcat Mountain Corporation got in there and was in talks with someone to develop it. But Thad Thorne was the first ski patrol, one of the first ski patrol directors at Wildcat, and then became the founding general manager at Attitash, right down the road in Bartlett, New Hampshire. Arthur Doucette ran the ski school at Black Mountain. He almost had more bona fides than anyone, because when an instructor named Benno Rubisca was sent over from the Hannes Schneider Ski School to Jackson, New Hampshire in 1937, Benno recruited 6 or 7 local hockey players to be his assistant instructors. One of them was Bob Morrill, Storyland fame, and one was Arthur Doucette. And so in the winter of 37, Benno trained these 6 guys who actually at the end of the year went over and passed the Austrian ski certification exams, ski instructor exam, which was kind of a big deal. So Arthur Doucette goes back a long way with skiing, and ran the ski school, as I say, at Black Mountain for many, many years. Mount Sunapee in southern New Hampshire had designers from the 10th Mountain Division. Mount Mansfield at Stowe, Vermont had multiple veterans involved, including Gordon Lowe, whose picture I happen to have here on the right. He was one of the members that I was able to speak with years later, who was on that Lincoln detachment to Lincoln, New Hampshire. But many other 10th veterans were at Stowe. Hal Burton on the left. Wasn't his name on the right. Arthur Draper on the right. Both were general managers of Whiteface in New York. Both were journalists. Draper had been a New York Times reporter and then resigned to be a forest ranger in upstate New York. And Burton was a ski writer who actually wrote a book about the 10th that's pretty good if you can find it. But Whiteface was developed by these guys from the 10th, as well as several others. And the ski area list just goes on and on. In outdoor recreation, guys like Fred Beckey here, seen as a young man on the left, and then more recently in his 90s, I think, on the right. Fred Beckey has more first ascents in the rock climbing mountaineering world than just about anybody in the world. And I believe he's still alive. I don't think he's climbing anymore, but he climbed into his 90s. I mentioned those tents and how uncomfortable they are. Jerry Cunningham formed a company called Jerry Sports, who built the same kind of tent as you can see there, but with the proper materials, so it was breathable, probably had a fly on it. And Jerry Cunningham was really one of the first to get into the, as the backpacking boom came on in the 60s and 70s, Jerry was well positioned there to benefit from that. First started out of his house in Ward, Colorado, and expanded into a lot of stores nationwide. This fellow here, Paul Petzold, seen at Camp Hale, was at the time he was kind of a big deal because he was a climber and guide from Jackson, Wyoming, from the Teton area. He had in 1938, I think he had been on an expedition to K2, and along with Charles Houston had climbed to 26,000 feet before they had to turn around. And at that point, that was the highest elevation any American had been in. So had been up to. So Petzold had quite a reputation. He was a medic at Camp Hale, and then after the war, he started the National Outdoor Leadership School. You can see him on the left here in Lander, Wyoming, which took people, boys and girls and men and women out into the Wind River range of Wyoming and taught them how to be group leaders of outdoor expeditions, camps, that sort of thing. He was accompanied here by Tap Tapley, who was kind of a quarter Passamaquoddy Indian, I think, from around Amesbury, Massachusetts, who was in the 10th and became active in the Outward Bound movement after the war, before coming over to Petzold's National Outdoor Leadership School that still exists in Wyoming. David Brower was the president or executive director of the Friends of the Earth and the Sierra Club. Seen here presenting the Sierra Club, one of the Sierra Club coffee table books to President Johnson. A little bit more of a skeptical eye from Brower on all the ski area development than we found from a lot of the other ski area developers that came out of the 10th. This man here skiing at Aspen, during the war, a lot of 10th people managed to get to Aspen on the weekends and ski there. Bill Bowerman went back after the war and became the track coach at the University of Oregon and started his company called Blue Ribbon Sports with a guy named Phil Knight, I think. And once they changed the name, it became much better known as Nike, and today still exists as Nike. And Pete Seibert sort of personifies to me the whole evolution of 10th Mountain Division veteran, Camp Hale trainee, and then going back to Colorado and starting a nationally known ski area. Pete was originally from Sharon, Massachusetts, and then in his adolescence, in his teen years, lived in Bartlett, New Hampshire, right next to this little ski area, little rope tow area called Stanton Slopes in Bartlett, New Hampshire. Spent a few years there, then went into the 10th, was wounded, seriously wounded in the war, came back, recovered, went on to the patrol at Aspen for a little while, and then used his GI Bill money to go to hotel school in Switzerland. And when he came back, his friend Earl Eaton, well, here's his friend Bob Parker, going a little, also in the 10th. Parker became a very important corporate communications and marketing, and ultimately vice president of Pete's Resort, and put here in this empty valley that I think it was U.S. Highway Route 6 ran through, that a lot of the 10th veterans drove quite frequently to get to Denver, but never realizing that this terrain up here, but more importantly the terrain in back of it, was prime ski terrain within 100 miles of Denver. And it took one of Pete's friends, a guy named Earl Eaton, to point this out. And Pete and Earl quietly assembled a group of investors, bought land here, and today this is where Vail, Colorado sits. So it really is something that this was overlooked for years and years, while people are looking everywhere in Colorado to develop an area. And of course, we know how widespread Vail resorts became after Pete was kind of pushed out. But so they had a huge impact in skiing, outdoor recreation, but the 10th was dissolved in 1945, reactivated in the Korean War as a standard infantry division, and then dissolved again, then inactivated until 1985, when the 10th Mountain Division was reactivated and based in Fort Drum, New York. And since that time, the 10th Mountain has become I think still the most deployed division in the U.S. Army because of their ability to operate in rough terrain in all conditions. The ski aspect of it has pretty much been dropped, I believe. They still ski, but they don't foresee military operations on skis. That never really happened during the Second World War, and they no longer have that function of sending detachments to train standard infantry units in mountain operations. That function is fulfilled by a group called the Army Mountain Warfare School in Jericho, Vermont. And this is a picture taken at one of their little shows for veterans over in Jericho. And troops from other units come through the Mountain Warfare School periodically and learn their mountain gear there. And I believe there's another similar Marine operation in California. But so the 10th continues on. The veterans got together almost before the war ended and formed an organization, a very, very strong organization with chapters all over the country. This is traditionally the New England chapter has a memorial service on the top of Mount Washington every August. This is 3 or 4 years ago now, and I think only 2 of these veterans are still alive. But that service continues with descendants of the 10th and with people from the Mountain Warfare School and the active duty 10th and the Vermont National Guard gather every August. And these kind of things happen all over the country. So it's a very strong network of people and still going strong. So that guy we looked at right at first, Bob Livermore, who is from Lincoln, Mass, is one of the 4 guys sitting around the fire at Bromley, served with the 10th throughout the war. None of the other founders did. But he wrote this on the troop ship on the way back to a National Ski Patrol newsletter, as I understand it. So here's last words from Bob Livermore were, "There were some who couldn't ski, some who were scared of heights, some couldn't rappel, some couldn't pack a mule, some hated the sight of hills, some loved it. But they were all soldiers and they could all fight, and they were all proud as hell as being U.S. mountain troops." Bob Livermore. So I just want to mention before take any questions, if there are any, that thanks to the Denver Public Library 10th Mountain Resource Center, there is a great resource online with the Denver Public Library about the 10th Mountain Division that anybody can go to. You just Google the Denver Public Library, look for research, and look for 10th Mountain Division. And you can find hundreds of digitized photos online and a lot of information out there. So there's a place there you can look up names to see if they were in the 10th or if they were, in what unit they were. But they do great work out there. And they have a dedicated archivist named Kelly who is available to answer questions. So with that, maybe I'll turn it back over to Susan and see if anyone has anything to add.
Thank you. That was an awesome presentation. I definitely learned a lot, but I have to admit, I'm not a big history buff, so some of it was a little bit beyond me. But it was very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, definitely put them in the chat. We are a little bit past 8. So if you guys have to get going, that's okay too. We'll stay and do questions for a few minutes. Reading Lady asks, what history is there at the museum?
Well, at the museum, both museums, we've got a little corner of the 10th Mountain Division, a little bit different in each one, trying to make the point that the 10th soldiers were so active in starting ski areas after the war. Also, books are available. There's a tremendous amount of literature that's been written about the 10th, and we have some of that. And we can also steer anyone to these, the public library resource center or to that archivist. And also we've got some of our newsletters that we've done about the 10th Mountain.
Okay, great. Anne asks, is the museum open to the public or by appointment?
Yeah, the museums, both museum branches are open from 10 to 5, 7 days a week during ski season, and then we adjust down a little bit in the spring, but no appointment necessary. There is, if you wanted to do research, you would need to email one of us to make an appointment to have us bring some of the things over from that collections building that I showed.
Okay. And if since you missed the beginning of the presentation, it is being recorded. To get a link, just make sure that you're either following the Facebook event or you are signed up through the library calendar. I'll be sending out the recording link shortly after we wrap up. So just make sure that I have an email to get to you. You're welcome. All right, looks like that's it for everyone. Thank you so much for doing this presentation for us. I hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks, everybody.